a podcast for dads who love music, made by dads who love music. And now your hosts, Josh and Joe.
Hello and welcome to Dad Rocks, the podcast about being a dad and loving music and how the two intersect in our lives. I'm Josh and I'm here with my co-host Joe.
What's up, Josh?
And our producer Steve.
Hey guys.
Today our guest is Billy Martin. Billy is most well known for being the drummer of the jazz trio Medeski, Martin and Wood, but he is also an artist, an educator, and most importantly, a father of two young men. Billy, welcome to Dad Rocks.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
I see you.
Hear you.
First off, how have the last 2 years been for you and your family, because with COVID and everything?
Yeah, actually, it's brought us together more, actually, to be frank and honest, which has been a good thing because the boys going through adolescence, up to this point, now they're kind of young men who had some trials and tribulations of separation and things like that in different ways. It's been really kind of healing in a way, coming together and getting through this for sure. Yeah, that's ultimately been good. Challenging maybe for my youngest, who's 18, who, was graduating his senior year of high school. So that year there was no hanging out at the school at all with his friends. So he's pretty much holed up at home, a little bit of contact with some friends. But yeah. Other than that, it's for the family, it's good. Like we just had to be together, they're all living with us at home and working. So as
good.
Well, essential working, my older son. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What's his job? What was his essential job?
Actually, my wife and my son Dakota, my wife Phaedra and Dakota were working at Whole Foods in Paramus, New Jersey, which is kind of pretty busy.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Joe and I live right there.
I go there a bunch, yep.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm in Oradell, so it's right around the corner.
What?
Yeah.
I'm in Englewood. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, my wife was working
Close
for
by.
about 3 or 4 years at in the health and body, what do they call it? But yeah, so they were full on, like nonstop, busy, doing that essential work. I think my son Dakota got a very mild case very early on. Other than that, none of us got it. But yeah, they were working and Sawyer was just really home, just being senior in high school. And I was hunkering down, working on making the transition, creative music studio to get sort of online programs going, which was something I wanted to do anyway.
Very
so
cool.
We were all kind of busy and doing our thing and living together.
You mentioned this and, your youngest son just graduated high school. So were there any kind of, strong emotions that you went through or any kind of almost like I've made it, kept them alive through their childhood and now they're off or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sure. I think every rite of passage, whatever it might be, graduating high school. Today, Sawyer got his driver's license. My youngest, Sawyer, has just got back from Barcelona. So he's taking a gap year.
Oh, wow.
Or maybe, I don't know, go right into a career. He could go to Rutgers and all this stuff. He's accepted to some universities. He went to Barcelona, lived with a family that we know closely. Actually, their daughter lived with us for a summer, and so he stayed with them. And
cool.
They have their own restaurant in Barcelona. Cool. So all these things. But yes, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, of course, it's very special, emotional. You feel your heart. You're connected. It's a love thing, and so it's a beautiful thing. And sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's sad and mixed blues feelings. But overall, it's working out. But there's been lots of challenges too,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a dad of two kids. My oldest is a son who's 14, freshman in high school. So hearing those stories of your son getting his license and then graduation, I'm just like, it's right around the corner. But I feel the same with us. We kind of slowed everything down. My kids were involved with sports. I don't know if your kids were involved with kind of sports or anything like that. But with lockdown, it really seemed to slow everything down, like you said. And it kind of brought us all together. We were just home every day, 24/7 basically. So I could totally relate to that.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it would be like if it was 5 or 10 years, ago and this happened. Yeah. What would that be like if they were your son's age or if they were younger, whatever, going through puberty, who knows, being defiant, and just being like, I'm out of here and creating some kind of feeling of danger and stuff. It's all part of life, man. Sports. My oldest Dakota was really into soccer for many years. He was
cool.
pretty good.
Same with my son. Yep.
pretty good athlete actually, but then he got into drumming. Speaking of dad rocks, he was like school rock drummer.
Cool.
Kind of like,
oh, nice.
Wasn't really sure what he wanted to get, at that age, and then he transitioned from soccer to playing for a couple of 2 or 3 years, and really did like, that was a good thing to see happen, connecting with a few different age groups, younger and older, playing drums for different groups in School of Rock. So then he kind of like got out of the sports and then just kind of like did that for a while, then got into a bunch of trouble. Yeah, for years, lots of trouble.
Well, my son, I've been trying, as you see behind me, there's a drum set. I'm a drummer as well. And cool. I've had no luck right now getting him into rock music and stuff. He's dabbled a little bit on the drums. So I'm hoping, like your son, he'll transition from, the soccer world, which is cool too. You could do both. Hopefully eventually he gets an interest in drumming. I was going to ask you that next, if any of your sons, play music, or we're going to follow you into the music world.
It's interesting. No, I don't see that right now. Dakota, the older one, he's good. He's just a natural. He even sat in with Mesmar Wood. Like we did this festival in Jamaica. It was Little Feet has this festival every year, and it's like weekends after weekends of being in a resort, and different bands come down and play, and so they invited us down. But anyway, that was really cool to have my son sit in, play a tune. I got off the drums and just watched. It was like, whoa, he was playing in front of a festival audience and stuff. So that was a proud moment, actually. But then after that, it dropped off. He just completely has no interest. And I got to say, I have to let him find it for himself. I need him to hear his own voice. I can tell he's still thinking about it. He talks about it more with his mom than me. And I always invite him into the studio, just like right now. And he has a girlfriend. They both have girlfriends.
Oh, there you go. That's the main thing probably right now.
Yeah. And he's busy working his butt off at, the grocery store here. And I hope I've been a good enough influence in some ways. But you really have to let them discover their own way in. Whether it is someday they say, oh man, I didn't realize Dad has a drum set for 10 years. I never, let me play it, and you never know when it's going to happen. It's sort of just like music, and especially improvising. It's about the timing of things. You can't force something when you improvise. You can't preconceive this is what is going to happen. That's not improvising, and that's not listening and being in the moment. I think it's the same thing with raising kids. You have to realize everybody has different timing, and things will resonate with them at different times and when you think it should. But there are things, rites of passages that happen. Puberty, it's like getting your license, you're graduating, staying alive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just at the beginning stages. I got a 3-year-old right now, so he's
wonderful.
Thanks. But was being a professional musician, you were in the music world pretty early on in your adulthood. Was fatherhood something that you always had on your life plan, or was that something just kind of happened and you kind of fell into it?
The latter. Yeah, I didn't think about it much. I didn't dream about it and think about it. I thought that there would be possible, but there's always a part of me I'm the younger brother of 3, so everybody is no matter what age you are, I'm always the younger brother to you, whoever relationship I'm having. So it's a relationship with the world. Everything's sort of how's that possible? And I have kids. But when I met Phaedra, I was it just kind of was a natural thing. We got married, and then 2 years later, we decided let's start thinking about having kids, and boom, Dakota showed up like magic. Yeah. And then 3 years later, it was kind of a magical thing. It doesn't always happen that way, but for me it did. It just was a natural thing. And I had really great parents. I mean, as far as lucky, they never divorced, and they not sometimes I think maybe they should have divorced, the way they fight and stuff. But as far as parents go, they're always very much connected and rooting me on and supporting me, and just the love. Sometimes too much at times, but that's not a bad thing.
I know your dad was an accomplished violinist and playing around New York City all the time. So, talk about influence. I'm sure you were heavily influenced by him. Is that how you got into really jazz music and music in general?
Joe, that's really nice of you to bring that up, because I never thought of it now reversing the dad role as my dad. What was he to me? Yeah, that was really influential. And I really appreciate it more so now, the things that he exposed me to. And honestly, I think unknowingly, I think my dad is a natural, and it just comes naturally to him. He's a very generous person. He's a great host. And so being his son was like an awesome thing. I loved my dad, and he always gave me love, like deep love, and also let me, he gave me the just right amount of distance to, find things out on my own and stuff. But like, yeah, he was playing in the New York City Ballet and the New York City Opera orchestras one season, then the other one. They would just flip at Lincoln Center in New York City. And there would be times where he would take me to rehearsals, and I have a feeling it was just because my mom needed a break or she was away or whatever. She was teaching dancing school, 200 students in our neighborhood in New York. So I was this little kid. My dad took me to a rehearsal, or he took me to, he was doing like maybe a movie or a recording. And so I would sometimes get up in the recording studio where he was doing a session, and I would sit in the control room and watch them work, watch the conductor, and watch really famous people come in and out. A lot of amazing people. Milton Berle to Julie Andrews to Ben Vereen to older generation stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They're legends, though.
Yeah, he made records with Madonna. He didn't even know who she was. He's just like, he just was so disconnected from what was hip and what was happening, But I was like, oh, my God. And one time he took me, and I was older. I was probably in my late teens. Took me to the recording session of The Untouchables, which was Ennio Morricone. He's one of the
That's right.
one of the greatest film composers. He just got an Academy Award for his lifetime. A couple of years ago, but it was doing The Untouchables, which was the Brian De Palma film with Sean Connery, and I was like, oh my God, it had like an 80-piece orchestra, this huge studio.
Wow.
Scoring this film, and then De Palma kicked me out. He's like, who's this kid? What's he doing here? But my dad would bring me in. He'd sneak me in and stuff like that. And that was one of the situations where he didn't care what anybody said. He would sneak me in and say, check this out. Or like, oh, you're interested in that, And so that is such a precious, gift. Watching him work and being like amazed by the level of production and stuff that they did with orchestral music. And that's really drawn me to it even more. I always wanted to be involved with orchestras. And now I'm getting more involved now in my later life, and doing film stuff myself. And my mom had me tap dancing, when I was young, and that contributed to my rhythm, But my dad, as far as jazz goes, it was more of a classical world. He admired jazz. He loved jazz. But it was my mom who had the Duke Ellington, Count Basie, because she was a dancer, and that was that kind of music, that along with other stuff and corny stuff too. But my dad was always turning me on to movies, we'd go to the Ziegfeld in Midtown, and we'd see the premiere of 2001: Space Odyssey or Fantasia.
Wow.
And because of the orchestra, and so those would be big events, artistic, cinema and classical music. But he also was an engineer, as a family of engineers. So he built stereos. He had a side gig. Before I was born, they had a hi-fi shop, and they would build stereos for people from scratch.
Wow.
And then he taught me how to edit tape, that splice reel-to-reel tape, and record things. And he always had this, the latest equipment that was like the first computers, and with software that would record. And so all of that came from my dad. And I just, I ate it. I was very receptive to it. My other brothers weren't so much. I learned a lot. That's why you see I have I build the studio in my backyard, and I do all these things with my son, Dakota, help me with build that studio, the two of us. And
great.
just
That's
because my dad, really exposed me to, hey, this is how you use this tool. Check this out. Computers, not just computers, electronics, recording equipment, but fixing his car, and he had every damn tool you could imagine, and he was so excited about the tools. I wasn't excited about, geeky about the tools. But definitely encouraged me to I could do this. Let me try to fix this myself.
You could DIY stuff and everything.
Yeah. It's crucial
awesome.
stuff. Thanks for bringing that up, Joe. Now it makes me appreciate my dad so much, which I do anyway. But
Yeah.
So I guess, can we assume that when you decided that you were going to take a jump into the professional music world, that your parents were, very supportive of that? Or, were they kind of like, well, maybe you should think about something else?
Well, it's interesting because, yes, they were really excited for me to be a drummer in the world that they knew, which was Broadway pits and orchestra and stages, jazz, stuff that they were familiar with. They weren't sure about this music with Medeski Martin Wood, or the downtown music I was doing, or the even at first the Brazilian music I was doing, and then they fell in love with it later. But they didn't really understand it, and they were concerned about like, how can he make a living if he's not in the union and getting health benefits like his dad did or his mom did when she was in the Rockettes. It was a very different thing. It was like, having health insurance, blah, blah, all those things that I could care less about when you're a kid. You don't think of those things. And you're hustling, getting all this amazing experience. So, yeah, I was experimenting a lot, and I was definitely getting into things that they didn't understand. So there was that excitement of like, they could see I was talented and they were really proud of me. And I crossed over into playing Broadway shows now and then. And they were like, at a very young age, and they were just like, he's made it, he's got his foot in the door. And then like, a couple of years later, then I joined another, I toured with Chuck Mangione, like they knew, and he was like, they were very proud of that. But then it was a certain point where I was like, I'm really going in a different direction, something much more new and, more independent. And they were like, I think they were getting nervous at that point. So my dad, one thing that which was really cool, he's like, both your brothers went to college. I put them through college. If you're not going to go to school and you're just already working, I'll pay for any lessons you want to take with anybody, because he knew the value of private lessons. He knew how powerful that could be if there were the right people. He actually connected me with some good teachers. My first teacher, Alan Herman, and Paul Price, who was incredible classical percussionist who worked with John Cage and with the orchestras. And I did that for years, I don't know how I got to this from where you... But
no, it answers the question, perfectly, because
flowing.
I can tell you, my brother, he was in punk bands, and then he's in the EDM world. And initially, when he was going to make that, they were going to go full force. My mom was like, "You can do it, but you need to make sure you get your degree just in case." Like, she was supportive, but she was like, "You got to finish your degree."
Yeah.
And so, but now he's he made a career out of it, and she's super excited and supports him all the time. So
that's great. That's beautiful.
And we were kind of curious too, how was the New York jazz scene in like the 80s and 90s when you were kind of just getting started? We know that like smooth jazz was like in the mainstream, but obviously you were probably into the more avant-garde. How was it in that time period?
Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. So all of it was happening. There was really cornball type of smooth stuff going on, not just in the jazz world, but in the commercial world of radio. And then there was like really more extreme experimental stuff. And so in the 80s, it was really for me a turning point. Like I was I graduated in 1981 in a high school in New Jersey. My parents had moved out in 75. So I grew up in the city, 200th Street and Broadway, the very tip of Manhattan. And we moved to Jersey in the 75. So, I graduated in 81 and I was kind of making trips back into the city for lessons and clubbing with my friends. We'd go to Studio 54 or like Limelight or whatever, clubs for like disco clubs, like just to hang out on the scene. And there was also that influence of the dance hall world of DJs and sometimes bands playing. Even like, Motown bands would be playing this place called Heartbreak, and they'd spin reggae or whatever it might be, like at different hours, like you go to these clubs, was an influence. That was going on. And then there was like punk rock scene, and then there was like the jazz scene was kind of, for me, it was sort of like I was starting to connect with the Brazilian music. I was going to Drummers Collective, studying with a lot of teachers. Privately, and then I took this Brazilian samba class, and that really changed my life. It really basically exposed me to like different rhythms, Brazilian, Afro, Pan-African rhythms, and that's where my book really is inspired from, is making this connection.
Book.
Thank you. Making this connection with all these different rhythmic patterns, that can be, you can hear it in samba, you can hear it in Afro-Cuban, you can hear it in salsa, you can hear it in boogaloo, you can hear it in Bo Diddley, you can, bossa nova, second line New Orleans. But anyway, so the Brazilian thing really introduced me to a whole new thing. It was a very, very amazing time. And that exposed me to Bob Moses, Jaco Pastorius, John Scofield, Bill Frisell, Pat Metheny. All these people were really into the Brazilian scene. There was definitely a wave of Brazilian music coming to New York in the 80s, and I just happened to be there at the right time. And I ended up playing with bands in these clubs, And then I ended up playing in not just traditional Brazilian samba bands, but also as a percussionist in bands with Bob Moses. And then that's how I met and played with these people like, Bill Frisell, Chaco, Pat Metheny, and like these, and these were for me the jazz, the real thing that was happening at the time. It wasn't the smooth jazz. It wasn't, maybe some of it was a little fusion-y connection. Definitely, I liked fusion too at the time. I liked the corny stuff too sometimes, but then it was like the Brazilian stuff crossed over in those worlds, So it was like it kind of like as long as the Brazilian groove percussion was happening, I didn't care what notes they were playing or melodies at that time. I just loved playing that music. So, and then I met Bob Moses, and they introduced me to a real scene of jazz musicians who were rooted, in playing traditionally, and then growing up watching John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and Miles and all that stuff, and then being influenced by them, and then getting into more rock, jazz, fusion, Larry Coryell, all this stuff, Miles, Electric, and things like that. Yeah. And those things were influences that were happening to me. I was realizing that was happening. And at the same time, Afro-Cuban, Brazilian, all this stuff was happening. So then from there evolved like getting gigs as a percussionist. I was playing drum set and doing all kinds of gigs as a drummer, club dates and off-Broadway, off-Broadway, burlesque shows, all kinds of like cabaret gigs.
That's cool.
And then club dates. And then that just evolved into later, like after touring with Chuck Mangione, I kind of hit a wall. I was like, there was something that wasn't right. And I broke up with my girlfriend. I had moved to like Brooklyn under the Manhattan Bridge, Dumbo, and that area where like it's super hip now. Like it was like dangerous to live there, but a lot of artists were living in these cheaply, and I was as well. And so I was playing in the Lounge Lizards at the time. So this is the transition from going from this period where I was like lost and something wasn't right. And then after touring with Chuck Mangione, I kind of crashed and just like took a break. And then I went on this long bicycle ride on the West Coast, like a 3-week bike ride, living off my bicycle with my friend.
That's awesome.
And then I came back. It just kind of like all of a sudden these different kind of gigs came to me. Friends that knew me and knew who had studied with Bob Moses, they started recommending me for gigs in the downtown scene in the East Village at clubs like the Knitting Factory and CBGB's and stuff like that. And then I was introduced to punk and like punk jazz and like, things like the Lounge Lizards and John Zorn, and, the experimental forms of playing, things that mixed up a lot of different genres. And so that was when I realized I found my home. It found me, and that changed my life. To me, that was the beginning of who I am now. All that stuff was before with trial, learning different ways of playing, but like I started to figure out I'm an artist. I have a voice. Like I have visions. I want to try my own music, my own bands, and also play with other people, learn from them. So that's what it was like. That's going, and then that goes into meeting John Medeski through Bob Moses. Up in Boston, I was playing a gig with Bob Moses, and then he came to Brooklyn and was visiting, and we just jammed together in my loft in Dumbo, the duo, and then we said this is cool. We were just like we connected, and then from there we formed Medeski Martin Wood. Basically, Chris came down, and that happened very quickly, and I was still in the Lounge Lizards and the John Lurie National Orchestra, which is just a trio. That was a very incredible, vibrant, inspiring time. I even wrote a screenplay about it with a friend about this time period. So a lot was happening, a lot of things.
I was going to say, it seems like so much crazy stuff was happening in New York City at that time. I love reading books about that period. Even the Beastie Boys came out with a book last year, and a lot of like the first half is all about what you're talking about in the early 80s, about Danceteria, Club, and Limelight. Yeah. And all the different genres, punk, freeform jazz scenes. And it must have been amazing just to be a part of that and kind of be,
it's so
immersed
cool.
in it.
Ultimate school.
Yeah, totally. And this, just such a community of just like different people, all like, a lot in that area of New York. But some folks grew up in Brooklyn, and like the Beastie Boys and stuff. And like, we would be in the same studio with them sometimes. They would be recording and we would be recording, and we would like run into them. And when I met Phaedra, when we first started dating, she was reading a copy of Grand Royale. That was they had their magazine,
Wow,
Beastie Boys
that was
magazine. Yeah. So they're definitely an example of like, a whole other thing that was happening and what they're a part of and how it was crossing over. And it was an incredible time, really influential, and still, I'm amazed and feel lucky to have been around it and involved with it, and still in ways I am. I mean, it's still, part of the downtown scene and that legacy for sure,
You're saying how like MMW came together kind of quickly, and your first few albums are definitely jazz. That first album is acoustic jazz, on the improv side, but then you guys kind of built this following, and ended up somehow in the jam band scene. How did that happen? How were you able to cultivate that audience, that following, going from the jazz scene into almost like the mainstream?
Yeah, we had nothing to do with it. It wasn't in our plan. I mean, if anything, I was just like, this shit is so cool. Excuse me, I don't know if there's a family.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I was like, this is so cool what we're doing. We have to do this in front of as many people as we can. And we have to make a CD, and we have to make a press release. And I was like the guy in the band who was more proactive and definitely DIY, because I worked with these other musicians in the downtown scene that would make their own flyers, post them up, do their own television commercials. I mean, that's like John Lurie did. He was one of the first musicians to independently do a late night television local commercial in different cities.
Wow.
And like advertise his record, Voice of Chunk, And he was also an actor, so he was a cult figure. So but anyway, it was like the whole idea of like, we can do this ourselves. We don't need the industry, like screw the industry. Like they're screwing us, let's take this in our own hands. So I was the one who was like, well, let's just go do this all ourselves. I'm going to make phone calls at different clubs and send demo tapes and make demos. And that's another thing my dad helped me with. My dad being into having a TRS, whatever, 80, whatever it was, a Radio Shack computer, and then a Mac later. He had a database, and we collected names on the road, and we had a mailing list, and he kept that, and he printed labels out for us, and he had a Xerox machine, and we would make our own postcards with the dates on them, and we printed up press kits, and we sent them out, kits to like clubs. And so I'm just tying my dad back in, and how crucial, how integral he was to that, to really help. And also my DIY spirit. And John and Chris were like, I don't know, and I would just say, we got to do this. So I had a recording engineer, David Baker. I'd worked with Bob Moses through that jazz scene, and David was an incredible engineer, and like he made a great record, Notes from the Underground, which was, yes, you're right, Josh, was like more jazz. It was piano trio based with some horns, more acoustic. And then, basically it was like getting in our van and playing these little clubs that I had played with some of these experimental bands. We would play college towns and the Knitting Factory tour, and we would go down a lot, mostly down southeast. And so I was familiar with these places, and I just basically met the club owners or people who booked the club and just remembered them and made an impression or not. I would reach out to them, and then they would have us play, and they didn't know anything about Medeski Martin Wood, but we had met before, and they knew I was like one of these musicians from New York, downtown scene, they'd probably do something different and cool anyway. So then here we come, and then we play for 5 people. We play for 10 people, we play for 15 people. And then at a certain point, people were like, can we record your show? And we were like, at first, like, what is that? Like, I don't know, is that cool? And we're like, yeah, we should just be open. And then I started making T-shirts. And like I said, we had like in between sets, we did the whole sign our mailing list, selling cool T-shirts to pay for gas. Really like old school, whether it's rock and roll or it's old school jazz with Art Blakey in a bus, being self-sufficient and selling merch and stuff, and sleeping on people's floors and, coming in and out of all the wee hours through the towns and playing for, a few people, and then it built. And the tapers, the people who asked to tape us,
right,
we realized, later, were like, all of a sudden people were showing up from like, how is this happening? And then we realized there were tape trees and what we used to call, the deadheads had that whole subculture of sharing tapes and what they call tape trees. I guess they had their own databases before even the internet. And then when the internet came around,
the pre-internet,
our fans already had that together. So like, it was like starting to get shared in the beginning of the internet. Cool. So it was like, we really didn't, I mean, of course we did the work. We showed up and we played and these people recorded us and shared our stuff. Then other bands like Fish became fans, and then they started to play our music between their sets at Madison Square Garden or wherever they played, and people would be like, hundreds and thousands of people would be like, who the hell are these guys? They got to be cool if they're playing, they love Fish, and so it's like, to them it's so sacred, everything that they, and then all of a sudden we have all this whole other culture showing up, people who couldn't dance very well. We're like, who are these people? We're grooving our asses off. They don't look like they know how to dance. But they're sure having a good time. And
no, that's one of the best things I think about your fan base is it's so varied.
Yeah.
I got into MMW because a jam band at my high school played Bubble House at a couple of shows my dad put on, like street fairs and whatnot. So he ended up buying Shackman, and then I heard it.
Who bought Shackman? Your dad?
My dad bought Shackman.
Oh,
my dad
so
was
cool.
very much, he was definitely a cool dude, and he had a good ear for music. And so I immediately took it and just became obsessed. And going back to your t-shirts, I think you guys have one of the most iconic logos there is for a band logo. I wore just the logo shirt in college one time when I was in one of the jazz bands, and the dude from one of the other bands is like, "You're an MMW fan, man? That's awesome." So it's like,
I love it.
I think that definitely helped. That definitely helped having those iconic things. So that basically is an amazing story because when you go back and listen to those first 3 albums, you can hear the band's sound evolving. But with Shackman, you guys just took off into a whole new direction, like into this hippie jam band vibe started happening. And I was always curious if it was a conscious decision to play that and take advantage of it, or it just happened naturally. So.
Oh no, it was natural. It always came from us, always came from our hearts, what we really needed to do. Of course, there's a little bit of that, what the expectations of our audience and stuff like that. We would struggle with that, or some of us in the band would struggle with that more than others. But in general, it was just like a natural progression. I had introduced John and Chris to my friend in Hawaii. I had been there with Bob Moses, again, another connection with Bob Moses. Great jazz drummer, mentor of all of us, actually, at different times. Introduced me to this guy in Hawaii who he had met hitchhiking in Hawaii. And then this guy, Carl, was also an amateur drummer, and he would invite Bob Moses out to his incredibly paradise-like spot in a treehouse on the coast of Big Island, Hawaii. And then Moses said, "Hey, let's go hang out. This is a really cool place. illyB, come on, And I went, because I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm at Hawaii, I got nothing to do right now. And then we started hanging out there and playing music, and then, Carl had a drum set, and that was where the shack was too. This shack, he had this property a little bit up the hill. It was just a shack, a shitty, tin roof shack. And so at a certain point, I was like, John and Chris, you got to check this place out. It's so cool. Like, let's get the hell out of this, winter hell here in the Northeast, and we were, at the time, we had actually also given up our apartments to tour in the RV, and we were kind of living out of the RV and sleeping on people's couches. And we were like, we could just go anywhere. So we went to Hawaii, and that's where Shackman, that's where we made Shackman. But there were maybe a year or two, at least before that, where we were like, we would spend weeks and even month or two at a time hanging out together on the off tour season in the winter, January, February. And we would pay like $100 rent each for this shack. And we would just have all the instruments were there set up that we needed. The drums were there because Carl was a drummer, and there were amps and things. And then we were jamming and recording stuff. And then I was recording stuff with a DAT tape machine that I bought in Japan, our first DAT machine, and, whatever, Sony cassette record, whatever we did, we would record our jams. And then that was like, we can make a record here, let's do this. And then that just, at the time, that evolved into Shackman, which was a really challenge. That's a whole book in itself. Just how the hell we got to Hawaii and how we convinced the record label that we were going to do a record there. And if they had known that we only had 8 tracks, we went with a 16-track thing and we only recorded 8 tracks, they would have pulled the plug. Like, they wouldn't have even let us go and do the record there. They didn't want us to go anywhere on our own and make a record. So the whole thing was a triumph, and this was Gramavision Ryko disc at the time, and they were so lucky to for us to kind of strike that kind of the music we were playing, how we recorded it, everything about it, the timing, and then that was it. We jumped from being written up on downbeat and jazz is to being have a great review in Rolling Stone magazine and end up on Spin magazine and all these more rock alternative things. And the music was going in that direction. John started playing more electronic stuff. We were getting experimental and expansive, but also still grooving. And so that's another era, So from Shack Band was definitely a turning point, Josh. You're right. Shack Band was for sure a turning point.
So then I noticed this too, just from listening to your Blue Note albums, that those, first of all, was, I think, huge for you guys to be on Blue Note. And I'm sure that made you guys feel super, legit and, going to the next level. But also, I was just curious, because of that hip hop influence, since you were working with Scotty Hard, DJ Logic, remix albums, and then you were doing the illyB stuff. Were you growing up a funk and soul fan, like the JBs and stuff like that? Or were you really getting into hip hop, the golden age of hip hop in New York?
All of it, because I was clubbing, already, in the 80s, and I was listening to WBLS on the radio, which was was the R&B station. That was my introduction. And then, of course, all the music that was coming out, whether it was Grace Jones, Extended Remix, or whether it was, Grandmaster Flash, The Message,
Nice.
I had those LPs. I had that. I always was into the dance mixes. And then I was in the clubs listening to the DJs spin and hearing that, and all that was evolving. So I definitely was in it in my own way, a part of it, experiencing it in clubs, dancing and getting into a bit of the freestyle. I wasn't a total graffiti, hip hop, dude, break dancing to the max, but I was, out there in clubs freestyling, doing a little bit of that.
Nice.
And really tuned into the music, and really tuned into what the DJ, what the radio was playing, and what the DJs were doing in these clubs in New York City at that time. So definitely the part of the whole hip hop evolution, watching it happen and really influenced by it. At the same time,
was it a challenge to play on drums though, playing hip hop on drums, or that kind of style?
Well, I mean, it wasn't even called hip hop. It was just sort of I don't know. I mean, I was at the same time I was still playing to records like The Police. Okay. And, a new, whatever, rock records and stuff, but also checking out other records, Bob Moses, that generation, Pat Metheny and all that, and Brazilian music and Afro-Cuban, Caribbean stuff that was also fusion and dance, funk. Brazilian music was very hip, danceable music. So all those things were influencing my playing. But it definitely wasn't something, it wasn't easy to just incorporate that right away into my drumming. It takes time. It takes years of listening and years of playing with people who allow that to happen, even to let it out in that way. And you to allow it to happen, and to use all that vocabulary of different genres and things. So, but it did influence me, the hip hop thing, and it. And then what other forms were we talking about? We said hip hop and the Blue Note thing. You were saying, definitely we were really feeling legit with the Blue Note thing for sure.
Yeah.
But what else was it?
I was just curious that if you guys moved towards the hip hop influence, was it through the funk soul? Because that's at that era that was probably what people were crate digging kind of situation. It sounds like you were already a crate digger and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, I was my own kind of crate digger. I was in Tower Records in the world music section, but I was also with MMW. We were revisiting and listening to the JBs. I grew up listening to Stevie Wonder like was huge. And
Awesome.
And James Brown was huge. It was just on the radio, and that's what we were listening to. As long as I was also having my brothers having their records, whether it was Hendrix and Woodstock and like Elton John and Allman Brothers, like that stuff was there too. But for sure, like the soul and the funk thing came in, like it almost came in a different way when John and Chris and I get together. We had hundreds of CDs we shared as we were on the road driving for hours, sometimes 8 hours, sometimes 2 days to get somewhere, and we would just share all this stuff. We'd listen to Mahalia Jackson, with Aretha Franklin. We listen, to everybody, every soul singer, in the world, the deeper stuff, even preaching stuff and all these things that were the influence. And then I was listening to stuff. I was even into Brandy. I'm like, check this out, Brandy.
Right,
She was
right.
like, this bubblegum R&B singer, but I was into her at the time. And they were like, man, it was like, Billy, wow, I never thought you'd be into this teenage stuff. But I was like,
If it's
no,
good,
check
it's
out
good.
the production. I mean, check out the thing, and I was hearing something that they weren't quite hearing yet. And then later they realized, and then of course, then hip hop stuff like, of course the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, all that was before. But when I was with them, there was things starting to happen like Far Side. I'm
Awesome.
like, check this out, Far Side.
Amazing
It's
stuff.
Amazing. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about,
Yep.
And then of course Lil' Kim and all like there was a Lil' Kim record that came out that was pretty raw and dirty and like produced like in such a way, Puff Daddy or what do they call him, P Diddy now, and then Biggie, Biggie Smalls, like they were producing this stuff and they were taking music and making dropouts. And then I was like playing those dropouts and I was like,
Nice.
why can't I do that
Cool.
and then John and Chris were like, oh my God, whoa, where did that come from? And so there you go. There you're getting like, and then of course listening to JB's, and playing like that for hours and hours in the shack in Hawaii. Have a guitarist friend, our friend Danny Bloom, who ended up on one record. He played amazing rhythm. We would just play JB's style stuff for all night.
Wow.
Listen to the music, and so there was that period of like absorbing that stuff, reabsorbing it, and even a tune like called Think.
Yeah.
We titled the song called Think, but it was really just like, because we love Think, that JB's, you better think, right? But we were like, this was our version of it. We weren't trying to copy it, but it was definitely like the spirit of something about it. We had to like pay homage to it.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm going off the rails. But
Hey, this is great stuff, man.
We love this.
Great
We
stuff.
love this.
Yeah.
Being that it's a parent podcast, I got to bring up the kids album, Let's Go Everywhere, which I was a huge fan of the minute it came out, and I can play it with my son. And we were getting ready for the interview. I've been playing it, and he's obsessed with the Train song. He loves Pat a Cake, which I think one of your sons or both your sons.
Dakota.
Yeah,
Dakota's rapping.
Yeah, he's rapping on there.
Rapping.
Loves the Pirates Won't Take Baths song.
Oh yeah.
And I know you guys were really proud of that album and had, I think in an interview you said, our goal was to make a children's album, but one that, wasn't downplaying the fact that it was a children's album. You want to put out high quality music for kids. And the rest of that, you guys recorded that 2007, put out 2008, but the rest of 2008 was crazy with the Radiolarians stuff. So what was the impetus for both of those projects? And like, how did that year kind of unfold for you as a band?
I can't believe you. It's like you're telling me about something I don't even remember. Like, wow, what all happened in 2008? I'm not surprised. Well, the children's records, that happened because we just had some. John, Chris, and our manager Liz lived up in the Catskills, like near Woodstock and all that area, and I still lived here in Jersey, in Englewood, and there were people up there that lived up there that were in the music industry, as there always have been for a long time. And there was a couple that was like starting their own label. And, this woman used to run V2, work for Virgin. She was like a big, crazy, what is that, A&R person. And then she kind of settled down with her husband, and they had a kid, and then they started their own label, Little Monster. And we were one of the first bands that they asked to do something. And they didn't really, I don't think they really developed that label, but it was just for us. It was just like, okay, here's a budget. Can you make a children's record? And we're like, okay, we'll go in the studio for 3 days. Let's go. And let's just meet and show up. And, if you have any ideas, bring them. But and that's what it was. We each of us, we had some ideas, but most of the record was we had no idea, and we just experimented, and we ended up laying tracks down. And by the third day, we had lots of material to build and mix, and then add the kids and add our friend Tim writing lyrics for Let's Go Everywhere and Pirates Don't Take Baths. Chris pretty much had his songs kind of banged out. I think this is the beginning of his, the Wood Brothers, kind of like him and his Oliver, starting to play together and get into songwriting. So this was his foray into that. And my ideas, they were all in there in the moment, and some things that I brought in, and getting John Lurie, as I said, to come in, and he cameoed as Marvin Pontiac. I don't know if you guys know who John Lurie is, but there's a show on HBO now called Painting with John.
Oh, it's Painting, because I know Fishing with John is good too.
Fishing with John, was, and then he was in the Jim Jarmusch films, Down by Law with Tom Waits, and
phenomenal movie.
But anyway, so John's sort of like a cult figure, but he did a record. It was Marvin Pontiac. Marvin Pontiac was a fictitious character who had apparently passed away or lived in an insane asylum, and all the music was kind of like Afrobeat, kind of like these funny songs about pancakes and driving in his car, and he had guests like Angelique Kidjo on there, but a lot of us played on that record, and so I asked him, could you do? We just have this instrumental thing. It's like a kind of like a lullaby kind of thing. We had two parts, and we had one more extended version where the beat comes in and it, has sections. And he just did a spoken word, and he talked about the squall.
Oh, that's a great one, yeah.
The fuzzy little lint in your pocket is actually part of this squall imaginary character. So cute, beautiful. And that was John Lurie, but we gave credit to Marvin Pontiac.
This fluff is the fur of a very special and unusual creature called the squalb. And the squalb moves so quickly that, like most things that are really important in life, you cannot see it. And the squalb will jump from your shoulder to the top of your head so fast that you will have no idea that it's actually there.
So those kind of things happened. We built after those 3 days, and it was just something where we were like, we really didn't know what we were going to do. But like you said, Josh, for sure, we were like, we're not looking down, we're not dumbing down this for kids. This is like, and of course, we can have someone write lyrics. Pirates Don't Take Baths, and we know it's for kids, so it's gonna be cool. But we didn't dumb down the music or that whole thing. Let's Go Everywhere was something where I was like, that should be the title of the record. It should be, it's a journey. This whole thing we're taking everybody on, and I was also like, I heard Johnny Cash singing "I've Been Everywhere, Man," and I'm like, we got to do our own version of that, and we got to figure out a way to do it, and we did it. And those kind of things happen. That's kind of typical MMW stuff too. Is like one of us will say, check this out. Maybe we could do something like that, and then we'll do it our own way. Sometimes we'll just write our own song based on that, or other times we'll be like, let's just do our own arrangement of the song. Yeah. So that happened magically. We didn't force it. It just happened magically, and I think it's one of our best. To be honest, I think it's one of our best records.
It's a great album.
Unfortunately, it hasn't gotten enough exposure. I think there's a lot more kids that could enjoy that, and parents that could enjoy that record.
Mm-hmm. We'll put a snippet in the episode.
Definitely. And when it came out, I was a substitute teacher at the time, and I would play it in almost every class that I would do, especially younger kids, and those kids would get up and dance
sweet.
and play. But and just like on the bat,
Where's the music? It's fun,
that's
right?
that's a great song. It's like a freeze dance song. With the Radiolarians, like that was a huge jump that you guys took, and that I mean I think it's a great. I saw two of the tour. I saw shows on two of the tours, but what was like that must have been a huge leap for the band to take as like, because it's definitely, it was a jump, you know, or it's not a jump. It was a you know, a leap of faith pretty much.
Yeah. It's, you know, we like what I think with any great artists, I'm not saying we're great or anything, but like in general, like true artists, like they will evolve and have different chapters, you know, and they have to leave everything behind, you know, whether it's like Dylan going electric or it's Miles going electric or Miles Quartet or Miles, you know, whatever it might be. So what record, you know, like there's like these periods in artists' lives where they have to just leave, you know, behind and move forward. And so it was just another concept for us. I mean, it started, part of the thematic idea of Radiolarians started when we were in Tel Aviv. We were actually we played like one or two shows in Tel Aviv, but we went all up and down. We played Safat as well, like the southern part. Played a jazz festival, and we played a club like Zappa's in Tel Aviv. And I was walking around this kind of hip artsy neighborhood in Tel Aviv, and I'm like, man, this bookstore looks so cool. You know, I'm into design. You know, I did the logo and everything. So I'm like always half the time I'm doing the artwork for the band. I walk into the store and I'm like, this is an incredible book. It's Radiolarians, Ernst Haeckel's, like, you know, drawings of sea life and microscopic life. And I've always been into that. Another thing influenced from my dad. He had microscopes and he showed me stuff in the microscope, and it blew my mind. And I was into that. I was into science and oceanography, marine biology. So this really struck a note with me, and I carried it with me on the road wherever we were. And then there's a certain point where the concept was like, hey, we have our own, these guys moved up to Woodstock area. We ended up renting a place in Kingston, New York, which is our new studio. Shaxton, Kingston, Shaxton. Shacklin was Brooklyn. That's where we did the Dropper and a couple other things. That was in Dumbo in Brooklyn, Shacklin. And we had Shaxton. And in Shaxton, it was like, we have our sound engineer who toured with us living in the apartment above. So he was like the best engineer we could have. He'd just come downstairs, and he also took care of our equipment and everything. And we were like, let's just do everything here. And let's just do like, you know, a series, you know, and then it ended up being a box set. And then I ended up making a film, Fly in the Bottle, which was about kind of like that period where we were touring South America, and then we were making Radiolarians. I was getting into filmmaking, and
sweet,
all that stuff culminated into that beautiful box set. Yes. And the Radiolarians was also an opportunity for us to go out and tour and play shows that were like not so structured, and then sometimes they were, but also sometimes we do an acoustic show or more chamber music like show, very expansive stuff. And man, we got into some really different music in that one for sure. It was departure in a way, and evolution, and it's evolution, pun intended, with Radiolarians being, you know, biology stuff.
It is a beautiful box set. I have it, and it's definitely, it's one I treasure. It was actually one of the first vinyl, I think, buys I ever did. It was before I got, you know, back into vinyl, and so it's one I treasure, and I'm definitely going to keep for the rest of my life. And I'm not selling that one on Discogs, so
don't be tempted.
Good one.
Billy, you mentioned CMS earlier, Creative Music Studio. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about that and your vision for that?
Yeah, Creative Music Studio was founded in 1971 with this incredible jazz musician Carl Berger, who plays vibes and piano. His wife Ingrid Sertzo is a singer, and Ornette Coleman, who everybody knows is like changed music for jazz, like amazing. It started really up in Woodstock and established there in the 70s and 80s, where people could go up and hang out and spend like the whole summer, or 3 weeks, 6 weeks at a time. It was like a retreat, and you could hang out with Don Cherry or Ola Tunji or or Dave Holland, Jack DeJohnette, Pat Metheny, a lot of jazz people, also classical people. And it's a real legendary organization that basically, shares all different philosophies on making music in different ways and improvising, and it's open to all forms of music. It's this is the thing. They're not teaching you jazz or any genre. They're basically working with all of that, so it welcomes people from all backgrounds to come and study or listen or play with, these icons of might be jazz or classical, and they come up and they hang out. And so more than 5 years ago, maybe 10 or 8 years ago, we were doing Camp MMW up in Big Indian in the Catskills 5 years in a row. We did this 1 week Camp MMW, and we had about between 50 and 80 people. Fans would come and they would live with us, and we would have Chris and John and I would be teaching in the barn and here and there.
I sadly never made it to one.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I always wanted to go, but I never made it.
Yeah, and so we would have people come up, John Schofield or Mark Ribot, or friends of ours would be guests, Ciro Baptista. And one time John invited Carl and Ingrid from Creative Music Studio. I knew nothing about them. And I met them then, and they were just kind of having a comeback. The organization was kind of like not like really that active in the 90s into 2000s when we met. And so after that, they made a little impression, and then later they asked me to teach a master class up there in the same place. They started having workshops there themselves. I was really blown away by their approach to teaching people how to play and how to jam and how to make music, and it was a very really heart opening experience. And I was already into different methods of teaching. I had my rhythmic stuff, the rhythm book, and all these other things, the stridulations, the kunga thing you mentioned, Josh, like all these things of connecting people with rhythm and also like with improvising games. And so that was like, then I was just kind of fell in love with Creative Music Studio and what they were doing. And they ended up bringing me in as artistic director. And then then 4 years ago, Carl, the founder, the president, and, handed it to me. And said,
wow,
like, you are like the next, you are perfect, and I'm getting older and we need a new direction, new life. So since then, I've been basically bringing it back to relevance in a way and sharing it with my fans and bringing lots of different artists in to teach, conducting workshops in New York City, upstate, in the Woodstock area, sometimes at my place here. It's growing, and it's it's just that my mission, my personal mission, is to just help people find their own way of playing music, find their own voice, find their own style, and help them to get there with that, and to break them out of any conditioning they've gotten, whether it's academically or it's just like how things were drilled into them, and help them to break out of that, because I went through all of that myself, of thinking I should be playing this way, I should be playing that way, I'm not good enough, I'm this and that, I can't improvise or whatever, I want to play classical music and I'll never be a classical musician because I stink, and all of a sudden, so going through all those failures, and I have a book called Wandering that like has all these essays kind of about going through the process. This is my mission. It's like sharing, helping everybody like just be comfortable with experimenting and starting to get comfortable with jamming. For some people, they call it jamming, improvising for others, spontaneously composing, or just feeling comfortable in a setting where you can make music with people, bringing them together in a community like the Down Sound scene in New York, people from all backgrounds, crazy freaks, whoever they are, they're all like working together or doing their own thing. Community. And so that's my mission. In Creative Music Studio, is this beautiful nonprofit that's been around for 50 years that now I can apply that philosophy also without me being the center. Like, I don't want to be the center. Like, I still want to do my work, and I'll do some of it there, but it's basically just having a place for people to share ideas and bring in other musicians, you know, to share their way of making music. You know, how is it for this musician? You know, how is it for that one? And then the people get deeper insight. Master classes, performances. So that's definitely, I'm in the middle really of like establishing something for the long term. I think I have another 5 years of just getting it to where I can hand it off to the next generation, rebuilding it and making it, you know, just like, for, you know, make it this place that everybody can just share ideas and feel like they're part of a family of creative people, you know, and finding their own thing there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just want to say on a personal note, you mentioned about, you know, helping people find their creativity and figure out who they are as a musician. I know when I had the few lessons with you 10, 12 years ago, when you sat down with me, you kind of helped me center myself and said, don't worry about everything else. You figure out what you want to be as a drummer. You find out your strengths, figure out what's best for you, and then everything will happen. And it definitely helped me in my progression. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow. You're welcome. That's what it's all about. And the other thing about that approach to sharing, getting people to feel their own feelings and not be influenced by all the other voices and the conditioning and you know, following their heart, you know, is that it carries through into everything else in your life. That's what it's about. And one of the slogans or whatever phrases that we used it came from Lester Bowie from our ensemble Chicago, who used to teach at CMS. He said, artists teach people how to live. And I think that's really what it's about. It's a very simple statement, but what it means is like, I'm teaching you to listen to your heart and to follow through on the crazy ideas that you may have so that it'll take you somewhere that your heart follows. And then you apply that to everything else in your life, raising a family, building a house, making a living, making choices, you know, switching careers, you know, all that stuff.
It's all interconnected.
We're all connected. That's another song on the children's record.
It's another great song from that album. Yes. So you put out 2 albums, I think, or definitely one album last year or 2 years.
Yeah.
Is it 2 years ago? Guilty. Was that 2020 or was that 2020?
Beginning of the pandemic came out. Yep.
Yeah, and it was talking about tape loops that you were talking about. That was great. Do you have any upcoming projects? Whether it's solo material or if MMW is getting back together, or if any of the other side projects you put out in the past decade or so.
I'm so busy with kind of like getting Creative Music Studio like established and applying some of those things. But I'm also making connections with a lot of different musicians and younger generation, as well as reconnecting with musicians that are my mentors. And I'm at this stage right now where I'm ready to collaborate with some of these younger musicians and some musicians I've wanted to play with for a long time. So I think my next record is going to be a combination of this, collaborating and seeing what I've been developing over the years, even through the pandemic, developing stuff. So I think it's just going to be more of following my heart and playing. And actually, I'm playing like on Guilty. I'm playing bass, a lot of bass and drums and a little bit of piano and some sounds. But that's something that I'm getting more and more confident with and enjoying, like just setting up these structures where I can have guests come in and play. And so it's going to be just more of that, a mix of like taking stuff out to the stratosphere with like experimental concepts of sound and music, and then just straight up groove things that also do that, just in my own way. So, but I don't have anything specific. I don't have any, I'm going to have this record this date. Everything's still up in the air as far as scheduling, but there's lots of things down the pipeline that are going to happen, gig-wise. I just, we just had a week canceled of a residency I had at the Stone, which is now in the new school, John Zorn's Stone I had my week residency, but they're not opening up the school to the public until later in February. And then March, CMS will have a week there, but that'll just be different bands that I had curate, mostly women-led bands, really cool stuff.
Oh, cool.
But I can't really articulate anything specifically right now. I want to write another book called Rhythmic Harmony, and which will be just a continuation of rhythmic strategies, but also a deeper kind of musical compositional philosophy on stuff. Artwork, visual artwork, I'm
Good.
excited to do that. I've been doing NFTs, I've been
Saw that.
really enjoying creating digital art, on OpenSea, illyB art, I think it is. But it's just I'm always creating and teaching more. I'm teaching at the new school. I'm teaching privately. I'm having an incredible time connecting with people of all ages and helping them, like Josh when we had our lessons. Is that it just continues. My mission continues of sharing that stuff. And, you run into students that blow your mind too. And all of a sudden you end up having a relationship with them and helping them and also maybe sometimes even working with them. I recently had a student come that studied with Bob Moses a little bit, and I almost cried when I heard him play. Because I was it reminded me of, it was like a new Bob Moses being born, and not in a copycat way. It was he got, it just, those things for me I live for. So I'm more and more about the education and the creativity that comes from that and the learning that comes from that. So from there, things will be published, records will come out, collaborations will happen,
It's awesome.
for sure.
We like to end each episode just to talk about some music that our guests are into. I don't know if there's any songs or artists that you're kind of want to shout out that you've been listening to or being inspired by lately.
Well, I've been listening to the Gregorian chants. I've been really into choral music. I've been listening to a lot of Gregorian chants, which are usually things from the church, from the West, from Europe. I've been listening to Swans. The Swans, they're just Swans, not the Swans, but Swans. Really cool group. A little more darker, kind of gothic kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard them, but I've always seen them name checked and stuff over the years.
It's funny. I really got deeply into Sinead O'Connor.
Wow.
I was some of her stuff from the 80s,
Oh my God, the way she sang, where she put certain things in the lyric, it's just tear your heart open. It's just so incredible.
Awesome.
Being what you are, there is no other troll for you to burn out.
That's another person that my dad recorded with, by the way. He played on her
Really
record,
cool.
and he came home. I don't know where, but I was like, oh yeah. He's like, yeah, I just did another record day, and I'm like, oh cool. Who was it with? He's just, oh that woman from Aliens. You know that movie Aliens? I'm like, Sigourney Weaver is a singer, and he's like, she's bald with the combat boots, the
God.
hair shaved.
It's so funny.
And I'm like, oh, that you, Sinead O'Connor. It was so funny. He was like, that's how out of it he'd be. And he just thought that was, that's pretty crazy when you hear stuff like that. But anyway, so he played on her record. It's just he's so oblivious. He just shows up at the date.
Yeah.
Just another job. Just read the music.
Yeah.
But anyway, Sinead O'Connor, I'm going to end on that, which is very unusual to say. And my heart goes out to her. She lost,
Yes.
her son.
Yeah.
So sad. It's so hard. My heart, we're talking about dads and family, and there's so much there's a lot of people struggling and having a hard time, and we have to like make sure we support everybody, our friends and their kids, and whatever we could do. It's just such a rough thing.
Yeah, the whole mental health thing with, like you were saying, with education, it's like education and mental health go hand in hand, and I feel like you're an important part of that too. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's what I think. Community is really important. Exactly.
Community. Yep. We've got to remember that, and not in like in a kumbaya way, and like,
yep.
In a kumbaya way,
both,
sure, in the good kumbaya way. But what I'm just saying is like not wherever you can bring people together. I don't care whether it's through the church or it's through an experimental art and anti-establishment scene. Whatever it is, there's a place for your kid, to feel part of something,
Yep.
and not against something. And I think we've really like had a rough time with all this division politically and all this stuff going on. But part of it is just like, part of it is just the challenge of life and surviving this stuff. And
yep.
Yeah. So look out for your neighbors, look out for each other, what could I say? Community, let's keep the community thing going, share what we're doing. And it's great that you guys are doing the show. I think it's really special. Like I really can understand it more now that I'm with you. We're talking about these things,
Well, thanks for coming on, man. I mean,
thanks for having me.
This was a great conversation, and we really appreciate it, and obviously love everything you've been putting out, and big fan of everything. And I thank you for giving me some great music and some great inspiration, as a musician, and throughout my life, and just some music that I just cherish for forever, pretty much. So thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome, and thanks for listening. And if there's anything I could say, it's the most important thing about being a musician, being a human being, is listening to the other people, what they have to say, what they're playing, or what they have to say. Listening is so important, I realize. So thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and special thanks again to Billy Martin for coming on to the show. We had a great time talking to him, and we hope you enjoyed it as well. If you want to follow Billy on social media, you can find him on Instagram at illyB, or just go on Facebook and look up Billy Martin. You can also visit billymartin.net to check out all of his solo music, art, books, and more things that he's been involved with. If you'd like to check out the Creative Music Studio, you can go to creativemusic.org. Finally, if you haven't already listened to Medeski Martin Wood, I can't recommend them enough, especially their children's album, Let's Go Everywhere. It's an album all ages can enjoy. Whether this is your first time or your 20th time, we really appreciate everyone checking out the podcast and would love for you to subscribe to the show. And if you like or even love the podcast, please go ahead and give us an honest review. Those things really do help. Or, just tell a friend about us. That also helps. If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and Twitter at Dad Rocks Pod, as well as on Facebook. And you can find us there by searching up Dad Rocks Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or any show ideas for us, or just want to give us a shout, you can always email us at dadrockspod@gmail.com. If you want to check out the music you've heard on this episode in full, we have a playlist which should be linked in the podcast description for you. Once again, thanks for listening. And remember, dads, you rock.